Okay, today I think we'll talk about a topic I was kind of obscure on last week, and that was where this information actually comes from. And of course, to begin with, that's the most important point. Um, so, the procedure that was practiced by these three men sounds like it was identical from all descriptions I've run across, at least to begin with. That the main, what I would call the real channeling or the fundamental channeling procedure, whatever you want to call it. Uh, and it went something like this. Basically, the psychic goes into a trance and he starts to talk, and that's it. So, before my previous description, I think it started to sound like the person giving the reading, as in the person that was asking the questions or doing the hypnotism or whatever, that person began to talk or so. No. It's the psychic individual. So for example, Edgar Cayce, he would lay down in a reclining position on some kind of couch or something and close his eyes, and then I think the person that was administering the reading or giving the suggestion to go into trance would have some kind of, hypnotists probably already know about this. You have some kind of key phrase. You say, like, I'm going to count down from 5, and by the time I reach 1, you will be in this deep state of trance or something. They count all the way down, and but the point is, so the person that was administering the reading, and I'm not sure in the Cayce readings, I'll have to look that up, how they say it, or what they call that person. But there's a person that has to sit down and give the initial suggestion for Cayce to go into trance, and then they would also, I believe, be the same person that would ask questions. It seems like from time to time, other people in the room might ask questions or something, but mainly it was just that person, and people would have their questions on a sheet of paper or something, and the person giving the reading, the suggestion, would read the question to Cayce, and he would answer the questions. And for Cayce and Solomon, sometimes they would answer the questions that before they were asked, so they could obviously tell what was written on the piece of paper. Of course, if they wanted to fool people, you could, of course, read the thing ahead of time and stuff and memorize a few questions. But I think any kind of worrying about, gee, was this a trick, goes away very quickly once you get into the actual readings. Because, well, yeah, I guess it's something maybe you have to get into for yourself and see it for yourself. But the amount of effort that would have had to go into this to make it a sham on the part of all three individuals, and the success with which they pulled it off, and the number of people that were apparently hoodwinked, and I don't know if you even call it hoodwinking when you give a medical diagnosis that miraculously cures people of illnesses that were just written off by modern medicine as being incurable. So like I was saying before, even if it was some kind of trick as to where the information came from, the nature of the information was that we could verify, that it was correct, was just shocking, as to how accurate and applicable and the wisdom behind it. And that holds just across the board, So, and I think it's safe to say that anyone who believes this stuff was mere quackery, in its crudest form, anybody who believes that has never dug into these readings to a substantial degree. They've never become familiar with the material or the process or the repercussions or taken the time to investigate it. So that's the basic process. The psychic goes into a trance. They ask him questions, and he responds. That's what I say. He responds. That's what it looks like on the surface, of course. I mean, he's in the room talking, and he's responding, right? Yes, I must have my cappuccino. It is a required part of doing the discussion. So, I'm trying to imagine what it was like for the first people doing this. Some of them had already been familiar with hypnotism to varying degrees. I think the people working with Andrew Jackson Davis had, they were familiar with the process, and the first people that he dealt with were experienced hypnotists. Paul Solomon was trained in hypnotism, but of course he couldn't hypnotize himself in this case, or didn't. And the guy that hypnotized him first had done some hypnotism in the past. I think he was just an amateur hypnotist. So these people would be familiar with somewhat of this kind of thing, where someone goes into a trance and they do answer questions, and the answers are really kind of profound. So that would be familiar. And Davis describes some higher levels of trance that are like that, and he says that the individual that's in trance can access I think it's the subconscious mind of the person giving the readings, and so you'll get all of their opinions and everything, but it will seem tremendously wise and things, because apparently the amount of things that we remember, we basically remember 100% in our subconscious, and they've proven this scientifically. Where I remember reading about open brain surgery, and when they had this guy's head open, they would actually took the chance to apply some electrodes to parts of the brain, and when they did, they would trigger these memories, and they would be complete memories of events, as if the guy was there reliving them. So I think the take-home message there is that in our subconscious mind, we remember everything. And if someone can tap in to the subconscious mind of another or their own while in a lighter trance, you will get some fairly profound answers. But again, if you spend some time and look at the kind of material you get back, you look at the answers you get back from that kind of person, it becomes fairly obvious fairly quickly that you're dealing with preconceptions and opinions and perceptions of an individual. And that's definitely not the case with these readings with Cayce and Davis and Paul Solomon. You get into those and wow, I mean the scope and the wisdom with which they're delivered, and the content, the manner, the attitude of the delivery, everything is so mature, so moral and upright, so profoundly wise and knowledgeable on every topic imaginable. Just without question coming from something beyond just another individual, even their subconscious mind. So the people initially administering the trance to these individuals, I'm not sure about the mesmerists that work with Davis. Maybe they weren't as surprised when he began to speak initially after going into this deep trance. But with Cayce, they definitely were, because they weren't even trying to hypnotize him. That brings up another thing. In Graham Hancock's book, Supernatural, which I would highly recommend. Graham Hancock is not a guy that normally works with, UFOs and supernatural phenomena. Or he wouldn't be the first person you'd expect. He's a really rational kind of scientist. He seemed like a scientist, kind of atheist person when I first read his first books. But it turns out definitely not the case as far as the atheism, but still a very rational thinker. And in Graham Hancock's book, he does mention, here we go, Graham Hancock, Supernatural. He does mention that some people can easily There's like it's known that a certain percentage, 2% of the population or something, worldwide, on average, can easily slip into a trance state, an altered state of consciousness, with no suggestion, with no drugs, just boom, they're there. And Cayce was definitely one of those people. Because the first reading, I think, safe to say, the first reading that ever occurred with Cayce is, like I said before, when he was a child. And he had come home from school and was behaving really erratically, running around, yelling and screaming and being boisterous and misbehaving. So they sent him up to his room to lay down. And I think I'd have to go back and read it, but I think how it happened was he was laying in bed and his mom came in and was sitting by his bed or something, and she just said something like, "Oh, I wish we knew what was wrong with you." And he immediately started to say, the entity, this body, Edgar Cayce, like, fell and hit his tailbone in the playground, and that caused like some imbalance in the nervous system or something, and here's how you solve it. Make a castor oil pack or something, and they're like, "What's a castor oil pack?" And he tells them how to make it and where to apply it and everything. It's something way beyond the ken of a child, obviously. And prescribes an efficacious treatment. They do it, and voila, it works great. Those people definitely were not expecting someone to start talking when they weren't awake. That's the thing. It was, you say, sure, this guy's just pretending to be in a trance, right? He's just laying down in his own act. But for anyone familiar with hypnotism and trance, it was very obvious that these people would be in a trance state. Like with Cayce later on, this group of doctors, 2 or 3 times, I think they've tried to investigate him, and one time they all came up and started pricking him with pins and stuff, and he wouldn't bleed because his circulation had gone down to almost nothing, and like all the blood vessels next to the skin contract, and they like pulled out one of his teeth and stuff, and he still didn't bleed, and they're trying to do anything to wake him up, and he wouldn't wake up. It's like very obvious that these people were in a deep, deep state of trance. So it would be unexpected to suddenly hear them start to talk. And it was with Paul Solomon as well, from the accounts I've read. By the way, I'll make another plug for the Paul Solomon readings. They have a nice little short story biography of Paul Solomon in the beginning of this. I think it might have been written by Mary Siobhan McGibbon, the editor. And so that's really nice. That's a nice plus. And of course, Cayce's biography is about Cayce, the whole thing. And they have a nice synopsis of their world life perspective in the back. It's a great, I think both of those things would be like the Paul Solomon one. I think it's like after shipping, it's like $50. And Edgar Cayce's biography, you can get it for like less than 10, I think, on Amazon in paperback form. You can also get Paul Solomon on DVD-ROM or CD-ROM, I guess it is. Yeah, it's not really that big. The first set of Paul Solomon readings on CD-ROM. And they may be offering the whole thing for download pretty soon. I think they're working on getting things available for purchase for download, to where you could like download the whole thing in Acrobat Reader format or something. But so they have an account in there, and there's some more on the web of Paul Solomon and how that all fell out. But yeah, this buddy of his put him into trance, and I think it was just to try to help him correct his ways. He felt like he was turning into an alcoholic, I think, and his life had really gone down the drain, and wanted to turn himself around. And so I think it was just a thing where the guy was going to put him into trance and just give him some suggestions to behave better or something. I'm not sure exactly what they were expecting, but what they got was, I think he jerks really violently, and Davis would do that. And when they asked Davis about it, he said it's because the body thinks it's dying. It can sense that the consciousness is leaving the body, and the trance state is so deep that I guess there are some really deep-seated triggers in the brain to where it can sense the moment of death, and to the brain that's what it seems like, I guess. In a lot of ways, it seems like the moment of death, and so the body will just reflexively convulse, and yeah, that's why Paul Solomon, he complained of stomach cramps after the first time. They asked the readings what that was, and it's the same thing, his stomach is like clenching really hard because it's this reflex reaction, try to hold on to life because the brain thinks the life is slipping away. So that happened. I think he thought the guy giving the suggestion, I think he thought that was kind of weird. And then this authoritative voice starts to speak, telling them, I think it was something like, you don't have the proper background to access the information in these channels. Go study up, go read about the Search for God books and all this stuff. And I don't know if Cayce was mentioned that first day or not, but I think it was definitely the second time, because they get Paul Solomon to come out of the trance, and this guy's jumping up and down. And he's like, "You spoke. You was crazy. It wasn't you. Some other voice was speaking through you." And Paul Solomon's like, "Yeah, right." And he couldn't remember any of it, and he just made the guy leave, and the guy kept insisting, he kept calling him up, and finally, 2 or 3 weeks later, he got him, convinced him to go into the trance again, and he was armed with a really decent tape recorder, and boom, the rest was history. I think they got every single one of Paul Solomon's readings like that on tape after that. So the topic today, 17 and a half minutes into it, still haven't gotten into it. Some necessary background, though, to clear things up. The topic of the day is, where does this information come from? If some other voice is speaking through Edgar Cayce or Paul Solomon or Andrew Jackson Davis, who's speaking? I think based upon our other experiences with purported contacts from the other side and mediums and things, we automatically think of, they're just contacting some dead spirits, right? Or maybe it's the devil or a demon or something. I think those are probably the first 3 things that your typical conservative Christian would think based upon the accounts in the Bible. I mean, think about the Bible, when the other voices are speaking through people, what are they? You have the Witch of Endor with the prophet Samuel being contacted from the dead, and then you have Jesus casting out demons, and people are possessed. Where does that come from? Demons, obviously, or Satan himself, maybe sometimes. So that's what a Christian would think, the first things. But I don't know, I guess one thing that jumped into my mind was Balaam's donkey. That's kind of a maybe slightly more esoteric Bible story. The story of Balaam, this guy is, I think he's told by God in a vision or a dream or something to go prophesy to the king or send some king a message that he knows the king won't like. And he doesn't want to go, and somehow he gets on his donkey to go, and he goes the other way, goes the wrong way, and the donkey stops, and the donkey turns around and starts heading back towards the king. He doesn't want him to go do that, so he keeps beating the donkey, and finally the donkey speaks and says, "Why are you beating me? I'm only trying to do what the Lord says," or something like that. I can't remember the exact words. But then, if you think about it, that's interesting. Who's talking through that donkey? That's not the devil. That's not a demon. This is someone encouraging the prophet to do the Lord's will. maybe there's some better precedents than that, but at least, there's one. Sure, it's an animal, which is miraculous in and of itself, but, so, I think even as a conservative Christian, if you have no other leanings or background and you're still fairly closed-minded, you should at least be open to the idea that, certainly the prophets, they were in contact with higher sources of information, with God himself sometimes, depending on the account, saw visions, things like that. They could sometimes see things from the other side. Like I think it was Elijah or Elisha or something, God removes the veil from his eyes and he can suddenly see these hosts of angels around to assist mankind, or the Jews or whoever. And of course, probably the biggest stumbling block for a lot of Christians is most Protestant denominations, and probably, not sure where most Catholics would stand on that, but I think many, or maybe even most Christians believe that there is no more prophecy. The prophecy was finished once Christ died, or when his apostles were finally dead and gone, or once the Bible was done, the last book in the Bible was written. And I think a lot of that comes from the book of Revelation. And perhaps one of the reasons the Council of Nicaea decided to put it at the end was that it had that statement at the end that, this is it, the canon closed, not one word should be added or whatever. And to a lot of people, a lot of Christians, that still held the meaning that there is no more revelation from God. We were given this work, and that's it, until the second coming of Christ or whatever. So that might keep you from being open to this. But if you're one of the denominations and things that does believe in prophecy and things, then certainly not difficult to see that this could be God speaking through Cayce. And sure, if you're a Mormon, come on, Joseph Smith being a prophet of God. I haven't read all the Testament and Covenants or whatever it's called, or the entire Book of Mormon, but you have to be open to the idea if God sent one prophet in the 1800s, definitely does not preclude the idea of there being other prophets. So the only question is, were they a real prophet? And then what do you look at? Well, what do they always look at? Look at the miracles. Are there miracles? Are people healed? Are good works being done? What's the nature of the information that's being conveyed? Are the prophecies accurate? That kind of a thing. And I know you're going to shoot me there because sort of that prophecy of Cayce didn't come true. But we'll deal with prophecy in another one. I don't think we'll have time today to get into that can of worms. But nevertheless, I think a lot of people would be open to the idea that Cayce and these other guys could have been prophets, real prophets of God. But a lot of individuals, if you're like an atheist, obviously that might pose some difficulty. You don't believe there is any spiritual realm or anything. And I've been there. I've definitely been at that point where I was at least entertaining the idea that this was it. We're just a bunch of molecules and we're just machines, and it's only the surface reality. So that obviously, then this would have to just be something coming from the subconscious or something, I guess is how you would interpret it. Or if you're like I was at the time of reading this, conservative, super conservative Christian, no prophecy, and obviously it can't be true, would be your first reaction. So, like I would say before, if you need proof, or if you have doubts, let's say it that way, if you have doubts, I would just so much like to strongly encourage you, don't just write it off. Look into it. If you're afraid that that Satan is going to somehow cloud your vision or confuse your mind and lead you astray, I would just say this: look at the miracles, look at the healing. What's good done? Was that the focus? Was that the message? Is this in line with the nature of God and God's love and kindness and holiness and that kind of a thing? That should be your guiding light. Now, if you're so afraid that you might be tempted by the devil that you're not even going to listen to the prophet, then that's your... I don't want to sound cold. Yeah, that's your loss. But I understand. Some people just are not going to be at the point where they're ready to receive this. Maybe in this lifetime they'll never be ready to receive it. And that's okay. It's not for everyone. I mean, this life, this world is obviously a school for many different kinds of people and many environments and levels and with many different kinds of needs for different types of environments that they create for themselves, et cetera, et cetera. So, I'm not going to spend all day berating people for never even looking at the readings. But I would encourage you to. If you are open-minded, curious at all, and, definitely just read these guys. Probably the best place to start. Since Paul Solomon, his story is great and everything, and that's a good place to start. It's faster, if you just read this short biography they've got of him. But if you need more, and if you want a more full-fledged, kind of with a slower build-up portrayal of this thing, okay, this Thomas Sugrew's biography of Edgar Cayce that's entitled "There Is a River," the story of Edgar Cayce. Just far and away the best place to start. Tremendous introduction, because you get the whole story and you get it from the perspective of these people that were conservative Christians. Well, he was a Presbyterian, but still relatively conservative Christians themselves, and they had serious questions about whether this was coming from a good source, where this information was coming from and stuff. So I would encourage you to look at spend the time to read those sources. Read those works. Read the biography of Cayce, But for the video hungry and for those of the modern generation that are watching this because this is how they receive their information, which is fine. That's why I'm doing it. One of the reasons I'm doing it. The other reason is so easy. It's a lot easier than sitting down having to write something, in a way, I guess. But I'll tell you about it. I'll tell you what they had to say and kind of give you a short version of how this kind of unfolded. So the best place to start would be, again, I think with Edgar Cayce. They asked the source of information, and that was the typical approach. You've got this voice, that seems to have this endless supply of wisdom. The first thing you do is just ask it, where's this coming from? And that's what they did fairly early on with Cayce. Well, I think it was maybe a decade after his first readings in the 20s for his dad. I'm not sure how much time elapsed there. But he had given a lot of readings and a lot more that weren't recorded for his dad and his dad's buddies when they were betting on horse races and drilling for oil and all this stuff, trying to make a fast buck. But later on, once it was Cayce and his family and they were really serious about it, and they asked the source, where does this come from? Who is this that's speaking? And there were several answers, I think. I can't remember exactly how it unfolded, like what the first one was and stuff. But some of the first answers were it's the higher mind, the higher self. Before you can answer that, understand that, I think the reading said that you had to get the story about what is the mind and what are the levels of the mind and how do you work. And because we all have this perspective from the physical sense, it's just our mind is this physical organ that allows us to think and have memories and things. And if it gets damaged, we have trouble remembering, so there's obviously some kind of correlation there. So it's easy to think that's it. So it's all from our mind, or there's just telepathic connection with somebody else's mind, or we have some idea of a soul, and we might have a soul, a spirit that exists beyond death. But as far as how much intelligence that has and stuff, we kind of don't really think about that, I think. So I believe one of the first things the source of the Cayce readings try to do was outline this kind of diagram for people. What's the order, the hierarchical order of who you are, the hierarchy of your mind. And so I think the first answer was your higher mind, Cayce's higher mind. Cayce has a higher mind, and it was a revelation to these people, because they hadn't read Andrew Jackson Davis apparently, that there is a higher mind. And what is a higher mind? Well, and I may have touched on this in the last discussion, but I'll do it briefly again. Repetition is truth. The hand of God. But so the what's indicated by the source is that we have a higher mind that is kind of like too big to fit into our little three-dimensional brain, if you will, and that we can only access through our intuitive subconscious side, or when in trance we can only access directly, and that kind of thing normally. And we have this higher mind that's our higher self. It is our self. It's our identity. And Davis says it's like we're a hologram or a miniature version of the universe within ourselves. So that, in the universe you have God in the center. Davis portrays it as this force of power and light, this eternal, humongous sun that's just spewing out all of creation continuously. You have that, and that's like the source of all energy and love that penetrates everything, and power, and that gives life. So you have that for the universe, and the universe has like circles, apparently, of galaxies in bands, and according to Davis, and each one of these has untold numbers of galaxies in a band, and each galaxy, of course, has untold numbers of solar systems, and those have a system of planets. So even like a solar system, it's kind of a microcosm of the whole thing. We have the sun in the center that represents God, and the planets that represent various spheres, and then the individuals. And so what Davis indicated is that man as well has his piece of God within him, and it is a piece of God. And an instance, we're supposed to be an instantiation of God in the flesh, each one of us. In a way, kind of like Christ, and the problem being, of course, is that we don't have the connection with our higher self. There's normally this separation from our higher mind that is really this direct, the mind of God, a piece of the mind of God, if you will, that is us. It's kind of it gets nebulous at that point, I think, because everything's connected. But we do have a higher mind, and that higher mind can access these Akashic records that are kind of like, like I said, our subconscious mind records every event that ever happened to us in complete detail. Well, apparently the Akashic records record every event that ever transpired in God's creation in complete, infinite detail. And they're real. They're like concrete, like some kind of machine that the higher mind can go to and access. So that in itself was enough for a number of the readings, and I believe in a lot of the readings it may have been the higher mind of Cayce that was communicating, and I believe it indeed was, and they said it was. I think Cayce may have called it the superconscious, So what Paul Solomon calls the higher mind, or higher self, or the source of an individual, would be the same thing that Edgar Cayce would call the superconscious mind. Yeah, because with Cayce, it was kind of cloaked in psychology mumbo jumbo, and really difficult to understand what he's talking about. Again, as in just about everything, Paul Solomon was much more clear. So that would be the first answer, and the easy answer, and the many times answer. This is where the information is coming from. But in the spirit of being honest, the source said, but that's not all. Definitely there's a group of entities that are gathered here at various times that communicate through the channel. And when he said that, they asked immediately afterwards, they're like, so who is communicating right now? And the answer was Halaliel, Halaliel, I believe. And they asked, who's Halaliel? And he said, well, I'm like Christ, but not for your world, in a different world. And I guess that was the easiest way to explain it. And so that right there, you get this impression that, wow, as you'd expect, certainly in the spiritual realm, there's different kinds of beings at different levels, and benevolent ones, that, and of course, the number of them far outweighs the number of people incarnated on this earth even now. Just the number of souls that are affiliated with this sphere, I'm sure, far beyond that. So a number of spiritual entities would communicate. I think it was never... I think the only time, I believe, when it would be a loved one that was communicating would be when it was the higher mind of the loved one that was communicating. And that's a distinction. Our soul apparently maintains, I don't want to step into erroneous ground here, but maybe a separate existence from the higher self, even after death, maybe until we reach that enlightened stage where we're connected with our higher mind in waking life. Because they would definitely say that, for instance, when Cayce would go into trance, his soul would go out and do other things, explore other parts of the cosmos that were unrelated to the reading, and even if his higher mind, I believe, was communicating through the reading, so they could kind of multitask and separate themselves like that, or maybe were separated by necessity for some reason. So many other entities, possibly the higher self of other people, but also entities that were never incarnated in this earth, that were never man. But some of them that perhaps were, some of them that were the higher mind of the equivalent of men in other systems. And that's something that probably deserves an entire hour-long discussion, is the whole thing with aliens and UFOs and all this crap. I'm being very loose and cavalier with my language here. It's not bunk, it turns out, apparently. I just have to share some of this from my perspective. I got onto Whitley Strieber back in the mid-90s because a friend of my wife's was reading him, and she got onto it, and so I got into it. And it all seems so real. It's like, wow, this guy's just fantastic. A fantastic fiction author. That's what I came up with. Because I believed it for a little while, but then I'm just like, so I was scared out of my wits that all these aliens could be coming around all the time. Then I was finally like, look, it all sounds great, but there's only one problem, Whitley Strieber. There's no aliens. I don't see any. Where are they? I can read about them, but I don't see any. No aliens coming to my house, not that I'm aware of anyway. So I kind of, by like 99 or 98 or something, I think I completely wrote off the whole alien thing. And I'm almost ashamed to admit, I'm not 100% certain how much Cayce dealt with that. I guess I know that in the popular literature and things, UFOs as such were not really well known in Cayce's lifetime, in the 30s and early 40s. So maybe it just didn't come up in that context. But Davis, oh my gosh, he goes on and on. He's like, goes through half the planets in the solar system, and he tells you about the aliens that live on each one and what they're like and what their cultures are like and what the major plants are like and the animals. And he just goes on and on and on. And you're like, wow, really, really, really? Until you start talking about Mars, and he's like talking about all these civilizations that live on Mars and the animals and people, and I was like, okay. At that point, I was ready to drop the whole book and just forget it. Maybe it's good that Davis had that statement in there where he's like, if you really love the truth, you won't just drop something because of one little fact that it seems like you can point to and say, aha, that's not true, and you just throw out the whole thing. He's like, if you really love the truth, you wait until the whole thing's told, and even, bear with things that seem like they might be impossible. And so I did. Thankfully I did. But that's the thing that really was a stumbling block for me with Andrew Jackson Davis, was his description of life, detailed description of the life on Mars. When, of course, now we've sent a ton of different probes to Mars. We've had the Spirit and Opportunity rovers crawling over the surface for years, and Global Surveyor taking pictures, detailed pictures of the whole surface, and, not a trace of anything. Here we had this picture from the 70s that we thought was a face, some carving of in stone of this humongous face on the surface. Graham Hancock even postpones the publication of his book, The Mars Mystery, until the Mars Global Surveyor could come around to that portion, and they got the pictures. And so the pictures come around, and I should pull out that book. It's in a box somewhere. I'm sure you can find it on the web. The new pictures of the same rock formation that was the Mars face. And just a couple really crudely symmetrical things I think looked like the eyes. Mountain ranges, but obviously just a bunch of rock and mountains. If there ever was some kind of construction, it was obliterated a long time ago. But still, definitely nothing on Mars that looks, aside from superficially, nothing that hints about any kind of life. The only kind of life we think we may find on Mars are some microbes, And Davis wasn't claiming that life did exist in the ancient past on Mars. He was claiming it existed right now, But I did remember coming across a couple of readings in Paul Solomon where he hinted that extraterrestrials were separated from us normally because they existed at a different rate of vibration. Lots of UFO accounts and things, that same theme keeps coming back. Rates of vibration and people's rate of vibration changing as they board alien craft or whatever. Another fascinating topic, getting into the science of this. The Paul Solomon source clearly says that simply by changing the rate of vibration of our atoms or subatomic particles, whatever, we can pass through solid matter. He kept berating people. He kept saying you don't need to fly around the world in planes and drive over its surface in cars. You can just beam right through the, just zoom right across the mantle of the earth or something underground in disembodied form or whatever. If you just change your rate of vibration. Again and again in this Paul Solomon readings, you get these really awesome hints about technologies that are possible, that were even possibly implemented in the past on this planet in ancient cultures, and they sound just like pure science fiction, but still, definitely within the realm of possibility. I mean, we start to discover with subatomic physics that there are necessarily different rates of vibration for strings that I believe put them outside of this dimension. If you read about string theory, that there have to be other dimensions, and it's just a question of how many there are, and things like that. So, and that was a brief statement by Paul Solomon about UFOs, and so I thought, oh, maybe that's it, and I think Cayce stated that life only exists on other planets in the spiritual form. And that's right, of course, Cayce did deal with life on other planets, because every planet in the solar system is supposed to be a school. You're supposed to achieve, like, perfection in anger, I think it was, in Mars, perfection in passion on Venus, and each one is supposed to have its own aspect of the personality that gets refined and perfected. And Cayce said in each one of those other ones, it was a spiritual realm. And in some sense, from all the different readings, I get that impression or outright statement, I think sometimes, that the only place that life embodies solid objects is here, in our three-dimensional reality we exist in. What's unique about it is that actual matter, solid matter, is embodied by life. And we can move solid objects with ease, and that kind of a thing. So in some sense, we may be in some kind of lowest energy level. If there are rates of vibration, maybe this is the lowest energy one, or the solid one, the one that results in solid matter and the kinds of subatomic particles and molecular interactions that result in solid matter. What we call solid matter, which it turns out even in hardcore physics, it's obvious now that all solid matter is nothing but fields, interlocking fields of energy. You think we're solid, but it is not. It's just fields of energy bumping into each other. So this starts to just become academic. If you're an atheist or something, it's just like, look, obviously beings existing in pure energy. At some level, we know we ourselves are beings that exist in pure energy. So it just becomes a question of what types are amenable to intelligent life and whatnot. Wow, I'm smoking right through this hour. I had no idea it'd be so easy to fill up an hour. Getting onto the topic of UFOs, huh? But later on in Paul Solomon, I don't know if it's one of the ones in the book, Volume 1, or if it's one of the ones I was proofreading for Volume 2. But he states very clearly that if we even were to go to other planets, which it looks like we are fairly soon going to go to Mars, even if we were to go there, it would be very unlikely that we would detect these other life forms that were there. He said, because they are at different rates of vibration. And so if you're standing face to face with a Martian, your hand is going to pass right through them. And boy, that hits right home with Martian Chronicles. I remember the TV miniseries, Martian Chronicles, in the early 80s. And this guy sees a Martian riding on this weird animal creature or chariot or something. And they come up and stop on this road. And they stand in front of each other. And the guy's like, they go to shake hands and their hands pass through each other. And the guy's like, my God, you're a ghost. And the Martian's like, my God, you're a ghost. And a little suspension of disbelief enough that they can see each other. But, as an aside, for the various things I keep reading and putting together from all these sources, it starts to become very, very clear that a lot of fantasy, especially a lot of science fiction, is inspired in the sense that these people, they don't know it, I'm sure, completely, but these people are getting in touch with their intuitive, their higher self, to a limited degree, and they are tapping into things that, in a lot of ways, are real, or have a strong resemblance to reality. Are clearly patterned after some kind of awareness on some level of reality that currently we don't know about. Things that are possible in science and life on other planets and things like that. So, even though science fiction is fiction, I think it's really encouraging to know that a lot of that can be inspired science fiction inspired fiction that can be informed and informative to a certain degree and give us hints as to what our capabilities are and will be and could be, things like that. So, I think it's very clear from all three sources that yes, there are Martians. Yes, there is life on many of the other planets in our solar system, even. But that, at least in our solar system, all those forms of life are at different vibrations in different parallel dimensions, if you will, so that we're not going to see them. Unless, as is the case with the UFO, the whole UFO thing, you have entities coming from those other planets, and they have an advanced enough science that they can change their rate of vibration and change ours, so that they can interact. And that apparently is definitely what's going on. And in Whitley Strieber's books, he clearly points out that everything indicates that they are trans-dimensional. They're from another dimension, another parallel dimension. Boy, it just all hangs together. It's amazing. You know, like the more I find out, the more I learn, the more it all fits together. You know, and that philosophy that I lately discovered was really hammered home by Andrew Jackson Davis. That is so helpful and so true. That philosophy where if you really love the truth, then you listen to everything everybody has to say. Any story, any you know, fictitious account, whatever. You just soak it all in. Just take it all in, and your first approach should be, let's assume this is true. How can it be true? How can it fit in? You know, how do I have to really interpret this, and interpret the things I already know, reinterpret the things I already know, to make it fit so that this could be true. And some things, maybe there are a few things once in a while it becomes clear that, you know, it's just a bunch of crap and it was based on absolutely nothing. But usually, almost always, it turns out that it is true. You just have to rearrange your mental picture of things a little bit. And every time you do that rearranging, it's your awareness expanding, your intelligence expanding, and you're seeing a little bit larger view of this world that's around us. And boy, that's definitely happening with me. And I think it'll definitely happen with you. You get into these different authors and start to read these readings and even other stuff. The readings, like in Paul Solomon especially, and Davis recommended a number of different books and authors that weren't necessarily inspired directly from well, it could have been inspired, but not directly from a source in the sense that these people were channeling the source. But The Impersonal Life by Joseph Benner. Oh my gosh. If anything was inspired, it's this book. It's basically a direct communication from your higher mind to you in the form of a book. That's how it was written. And just, oh wow. This I swear, is going to be the key that is going to cause more people to reach enlightenment faster than well, sorry, Paul Solomon. You know, I know you're in the light consciousness and self-esteem survival kit are the big ones, but boy, get it. The Impersonal Life by Joseph Benner. These are all things that I ran across, recommended by the readings, or things that were recommended by the readings, talked about them. I think all of them. I think The Wisdom of Wallace D. Wattles. I think The Science of Being Well was the last one that was recommended by the readings. But they're all kind of a work. This guy was a New Thought writer. And it turns out that New Thought and Unity, those denominations, not to be confused with the Unitarian denomination, but Unity and New Thought, they are very inspired. These are people that did get in touch with their higher self and established a whole kind of doctrine and system and just fantastic stuff. You know, I think we'll have some topics of discussion about those, touching on the readings and then also the stuff that those books have to say. And the other book, the Shattuck book, it's got to be in the stack. Yep, there we go. Mind Your Body by E.H. Shattuck. A Practical Method of Self-Healing. By Turnstone Books. There's the info. I'm just giving you all that detailed info for this book because I believe there's only one run in like 76 or 78 or 9 or something. of this book, and it was only in England, and really tough to come by. Maybe a lot of libraries have it. Maybe you can get it through interlibrary loan, but as far as finding it new, you can't get it new anywhere. And I found this on some online, Google Books connected me with an online seller that had this. So I was able to get a copy of it. Yep, and yet another one recommended by Paul Solomon Readings. Here we go. Power of Gems and Crystals by Soozi Holbeche. Oh boy. And the Secret Life of Plants book I've talked about before on YouTube. I haven't seen this recommended in the readings yet, but it does talk about the influence of the mind and emotions on plants and touches on some of these paranormal things. And it has a section where it talks about Marcel Vogel a little bit. I think that's the most valuable part of it. And I haven't heard the readings mention Marcel Vogel yet. Maybe they do, or at some point, Paul Solomon. But Marcel Vogel, boy, he was a guy that worked for IBM developing liquid crystal displays and stuff. His understanding of crystals and how emotion can affect the growth of crystals, and how then therefore the emotion that you encode in a crystal can have effect on plants and on healing and on restructuring water and all this stuff. Just, wow, amazing. Yet maybe another topic for discussion at some point. So the source. In the last few minutes, I want to reiterate, where did this information come from? In all three cases, these were unique psychics that were able to go to a deep enough trance that they could set their soul aside. That's what's called astral projection, where your soul leaves your body. They could achieve that. On a regular basis, they could achieve astral projection. And when you do that, in the presence of another person that's administering your suggestion, that other person becomes an integral part in that they're not giving the reading, but what they're doing is their life force is connecting to through your mind and to your body, and basically their mind is keeping your autonomic processes at work. Their mind is keeping your body alive. And I kind of shudder to think about this, but I believe the implication was that if somebody like Cayce, for instance, let's say when his wife, I think Gertrude Cayce, when she was giving the suggestion, which she would a lot of times, if for some reason she had been killed while he was in the trance and she was administering this, administer the suggestion, and she was asking the questions, and they were in this process where her life force was kind of keeping him alive. If that had happened, I believe he would have died as well. I believe his soul would not have been able to come back to the body. And I'm pretty sure it says that clearly in Andrew Jackson Davis. I'll have to go back and check on some of that, because he describes in great detail the whole process of what's really going on, the nuts and bolts of how it all works. But these people were able, these three, Andrew Jackson Davis, Edgar Cayce, Paul Solomon, they were able to go to a completely deeper level of trance than most people are able to do, to where their body was able to be departed from the soul. The soul was able to take off, and their body was left, and mind were left open as a channel through which these benevolent entities, the Great White Brotherhood, which means, I guess, a different thing than most people think it does or something, or some kind of construct, but an entity of benevolent individuals that were hanging around, and sometimes apparently Christ himself, or the person's higher mind, the Christ of a person within themselves, could communicate, and also a lot of other entities that had never been incarnated as humans, with lots of valuable information. And possibly most importantly, this gave them all the ability to tap into the Akashic records. And the Akashic record is supposedly, like I said before, it's the subconscious mind of the universe. It's where all information, all events that have ever transpired are recorded. And just a brief note about prophecy. I believe when they're talking about prophecy, it's not in the sense that it's set in stone in this Akashic record. It's that they can extrapolate ahead the definite possibilities based upon all of the detailed information in the Akashic record. That is subject to change based upon the free will of man, of course. So maybe next time or some other episode we'll talk about prophecy. But that's what I wanted to touch upon this time, is the source of where the information came from. And hopefully that cleared things up a bit. And next time we'll pick another topic next week. Until then, dive into some of this stuff. It's really good. See you later.